Zuri was known for his rebellious and stubborn nature, a trait he inherited from his father, a wealthy businessman with significant political influence and connections, including with the local police force. Despite warnings from his friends, Zuri believed that no superstition could harm him. He was an atheist and thought that his father's wealth could protect him from anything, even the supernatural. One day, the university he attended organized a tour to the village of Amara, a historic place located in the northern part of the country. While most of the students would have taken a flight, their professor insisted that everyone must travel by bus. The reason was simple. The questions for the final exams would come from everything they encountered on their journey to Amara. The trip was expected to last 2 days, so the students left early in the morning. Zuri and his best friend, Adebayo, sat together, chatting and laughing as the bus began its journey. Everything seemed normal until noon on the second day, when the bus driver made a stop along the roadside, close to their destination. The driver announced that the students could stretch their legs and take a break before continuing. As everyone disembarked, some went to the nearby restrooms, while others grabbed food from a small shop. But Zuri, ever the snob, decided the public toilet wasn't up to his standards. He confidently walked a few meters away from the bus into the thick forest nearby to relieve himself, ignoring the older students' warnings about the strange stone that lay at the edge of the path. The stone had been there for generations, and the locals spoke of it in hushed tones, claiming that anyone who disrespected it would face consequences. Zuri, however, didn't believe in such tales and thought nothing of it. Little did he know, his actions would lead to something far beyond his control. As Zuri made his way into the forest, a group of boys, including Adebayo, followed him. They joked and teased, their voices echoing among the trees. But as they were about to relieve themselves, an old man suddenly appeared from the shadows, his face weathered and his eyes intense. "This is sacred ground," the old man bellowed, his voice carrying an eerie weight. "This forest is the resting place of Okuru, the most feared and ruthless medicine man of Amara. Leave now if you value your lives." The boys froze in their tracks, their bravado replaced by fear. One by one, they turned and ran, their laughter replaced by nervous silence. Even Adebayo hesitated before fleeing after the others. Zuri, too, ran back to the bus, but was laughing loudly by the time they got there. "Are you seriously scared of that old man?" Zuri mocked, his voice filled with disdain. "It's probably just his farm, and he doesn't want anyone messing it up." The other boys looked uneasy. They began sharing stories they'd heard about the cursed forest and the wrath of Okuru. Tales of people disappearing and strange cries heard at night. But Zuri wasn't convinced. Instead, he scoffed at them. "You all are ridiculous," he said, his voice dripping with arrogance. "I'm going back in there to prove that nothing will happen to me." The group fell silent, their eyes widening in disbelief. Adebayo tried to reason with Zuri, grabbing his arm. "Zuri, this isn't a joke. You're playing with something you don't understand. Just let it go." But Zuri pulled away, smirking. "I'll prove to you all that heaven, hell, gods, and devils are nothing but stories. Bet on it if you want." The boys watched in stunned silence as Zuri turned and began marching back toward the forest, his laughter echoing in the still afternoon air. "I'm going into that forest, and I'll prove nothing will happen to me," Zuri declared boldly, his voice filled with confidence. The other boys, seeing an opportunity to challenge him, pulled out some money. "All right, Zuri," one of them said, stepping forward. "If you can urinate in that forest and stay the same for 3 months, the money's yours. But if something happens, don't say we didn't warn you." Zuri laughed, shaking his head at their superstition. "You guys are too funny," he said, snatching the money from their hands. Adebayo tried to intervene. "Zuri, don't do this. You don't know what you're messing with," he pleaded, grabbing his friend's arm. But Zuri pushed him aside. "Stop being such a coward," he snapped before heading back into the forest. As he walked deeper, the trees seemed to close in, their shadows casting eerie patterns on the ground. He soon spotted a peculiar stone, weathered and ancient, with strange symbols carved into its surface. It stood out starkly in the otherwise ordinary forest. Smirking, Zuri walked over to the stone. Without hesitation, he relieved himself on it, mocking the supposed curse. When he was done, he looked around the forest with a triumphant grin, muttering, "See." Nothing happened. He emerged from the forest moments later, a broad, mischievous smile plastered on his face. The boys stared at him, their expressions a mix of fear and disbelief. "I told you, there's nothing to be afraid of," Zuri declared, waving the money in their faces. "Stop filling your heads with all these ridiculous superstitions. Ghosts, curses, gods, they're all fairy tales." One of the boys, still visibly shaken, muttered, "You won't survive 3 months, Zuri. Mark my words." But Zuri laughed in his face. "Not even your so-called god can touch me," he said arrogantly, "because he doesn't exist." With that, they all boarded the bus and resumed their journey, though the mood among the group had shifted. The boys sat in silence, their unease palpable, while Zuri leaned back in his seat, grinning smugly as if he had won a great victory. As the bus sped down the highway, Zuri dozed off, exhaustion from the journey overtaking him. In his deep sleep, a strange and terrifying dream unfolded. In the dream, it was the dead of night, and Zuri found himself standing in the same forest where the old man had warned him earlier. The trees loomed tall and menacing, their dark silhouettes casting long shadows under a faint moonlight. The forest was eerily quiet, and Zuri couldn't see much, but he felt an overwhelming sense of unease. Suddenly, an intense urge to urinate gripped him, stronger than anything he had ever felt before. Unable to resist, Zuri quickly unzipped his trousers and began to relieve himself. As he did, children began appearing from the shadows, their small figures stepping out of nowhere. They surrounded him, their faces pale and haunting, pointing at him and laughing hysterically. The sound of their laughter echoed through the forest, growing louder and more chilling by the second. Zuri panicked, but he couldn't stop himself from urinating. No matter how hard he tried, his body wouldn't obey him. The laughter grew deafening, and the children's faces turned twisted and grotesque. Just as Zuri's fear reached its peak, he jolted awake. When his eyes opened, the horror wasn't over. The bus was filled with an awful smell, and every student was staring at him. Then it hit him. He had urinated on himself while asleep. The warm, damp sensation confirmed his worst fear. The other students erupted in laughter, their reactions eerily similar to the children in his dream. Some covered their noses while others pointed at him, unable to hide their amusement. "Zuri, what's that smell?" someone teased, laughing uncontrollably. Zuri's face burned with embarrassment. He quickly tried to cover the stain, but the damage was done. His usual confidence was nowhere to be found as the bus filled with mocking laughter. By the time they reached Amara village, night had already fallen. Zuri hurried off the bus, avoiding everyone's eyes, and checked into a small inn without a bao. But the shame of the incident lingered, and Zuri couldn't shake the unsettling dream, or the strange connection it seemed to have to his humiliating experience. He cleaned himself up and changed into fresh clothes. But that night, Kelechi had the same disturbing dream again. When he woke up, he found David standing over him, a look of disgust on his face. Kelechi had wet himself again, soiling the guest house bed. The entire room reeked. Kelechi explained his dream to David, hoping for some understanding. But David just laughed. "I warned you not to relieve yourself in that forest, but you didn't listen," he said. David added, "If you find yourself back in that forest, try not to make the same mistake again." However, David's advice did nothing to improve Kelechi's condition. During the group tour around Amadi village the next day, Kelechi began to feel unusually drowsy. Unable to fight the sleep, he went back to the tour bus for a quick nap. But when he woke up, the nightmare repeated itself. He had wet himself again. Fear gripped Kelechi. He was now certain something unnatural was happening to him. Regret consumed him as he recalled the warnings his classmates had given him about disrespecting the sacred forest. Desperate for a solution, Kelechi approached Chigazi, one of the boys who had made the initial bet with him. Falling to his knees, he begged Chigazi for help. "I thought you didn't believe in spirits or the supernatural," Chigazi mocked. Wasn't it you who said money could solve any problem? Look at you now. Ashamed and defeated, Kelechi stayed silent. He knew his arrogance had brought this upon him. He kept pleading with the boy to help him, knowing that the boy, Chigozie, was a local from the village. After some hesitation, Chigozie finally agreed. Late that night, Chigozie led Kelechi and David deep into the forest. The forest was eerily silent, with towering trees casting long shadows under the dim moonlight. The only source of light was their flashlight, which flickered as they moved. They walked for what felt like hours until they reached a tiny, weathered hut. A faint glow from a traditional oil lamp flickered at the entrance. Kelechi and David exchanged nervous glances, fear evident in their eyes. How could such a place exist so deep in the forest? And who, or what, could live there? Their unease only grew as they questioned how Chigozie knew about this mysterious location. When they reached the hut, Chigozie gestured for them to step inside. But neither Kelechi nor David moved. The oppressive silence of the forest seemed to close in around them, and they were paralyzed with fear. "You have no choice," Chigozie said flatly. Summoning what little courage he had, Kelechi stepped forward. But just as he was about to cross the threshold, a loud, raspy voice thundered out from inside the hut. Remove your shoes before the spirits strike you down. Terrified, Kelechi quickly kicked off his shoes. David, trembling, did the same. They both stared at the doorway, dreading what awaited them inside. They bent low and stepped inside the hut. The air was thick, and the dim light of a single flickering candle barely illuminated the space. Sitting cross-legged in the center was an old man with a weathered face, his eyes covered by a red cloth, suggesting he was blind. "Sit," the old man commanded in a deep, raspy voice, motioning toward a mat on the dusty floor. Kelechi's voice trembled as he spoke. "Please, sir, we need your help." The old man turned his head slightly, as though sensing another presence. "And you?" he asked, pointing toward David with an unsettling accuracy. "Why are you here?" David stammered. "I'm just his friend. I came to help him find a solution." He was startled and frightened by the fact that the old man somehow knew his name. The old man let out a chilling laugh that echoed through the small hut. "You were warned, but you didn't listen," he said, his tone growing serious. "You dared to urinate on the grave of the most feared and wicked medicine man in this land." Kelechi immediately fell to his knees, tears streaming down his face. "I'm sorry, sir," he pleaded. "I was stubborn. I should have listened. Please forgive me. Whatever it takes, I will do. I'll pay any price." David quickly dropped to his knees as well, pleading alongside Kelechi. "Please, sir, help him. He's truly sorry." The old man raised a hand, silencing them. "Sit," he said, his voice calm but commanding. Both boys obeyed, trembling as the old man began chanting in a language they didn't understand. His voice grew louder and more intense, the candlelight flickering wildly as he spoke. Finally, he stopped, shaking his head in disappointment. "The spirit is furious," the old man said gravely. "You're lucky you came to me in time. If you hadn't, you would not have lived beyond 3 days. There is only one way to save your life," the old man finally said, his voice grave. "But it is very, very difficult." Kelechi and David exchanged panicked glances before throwing themselves flat on the floor, begging the old man to tell them what needed to be done. "We'll do anything," they promised, their voices trembling. After a long silence, the old man gestured for them to sit again. He took a deep breath before speaking. "Your brain made the choice to disobey. But it was the thing between your legs that carried out the act of desecration." Both boys stared at him, their confusion slowly giving way to horror. "To save your life," the old man continued, "you must sacrifice either your ability to have children or your ability to urinate. The choice is yours." Kelechi froze, his mind racing. He was the only son in his family, their hope for carrying on the lineage. Giving up his ability to have children was unthinkable. But to live without the ability to urinate? That seemed equally impossible. "There must be another way," Kelechi pleaded, tears streaming down his face. The old man shook his head. "That is the only way." and you have 2 days to decide. If you do not return with your decision by then, the spirit will claim your life." Before they left, the old man's voice stopped them at the door. "Remember, it doesn't have to be your organ. You can bring someone else's in your place." Both boys left the hut in stunned silence, following Chigazi back to the guest house. Kelechi was consumed by the weight of his decision. Unlike him, whose father was a wealthy man, David came from a struggling family and was the eldest of 6 siblings. His family's survival depended on him. As the hours passed, Kelechi couldn't help but wonder if there was a way to save himself without sacrificing what he held dear, or if David might become his way out. Kelechi came from a wealthy family, the only son of influential parents. David, on the other hand, came from a struggling background. His family had sold everything they could to send him to university, pinning all their hopes on his success. Though David and Kelechi were friends, their bond was more transactional. David often helped Kelechi with assignments, tests, and even exams in exchange for money. That night, Kelechi couldn't sleep. The blind old man's words echoed in his mind, filling him with dread and desperation. By morning, he had made up his mind. When David woke up, Kelechi pulled him aside for a private conversation. "David," Kelechi began, his voice serious. "You know I'm the only son of my parents. My family's entire lineage depends on me. I can't give up my ability to have children." David frowned, confused. "Why are you telling me this?" "I was there when the old man explained everything." Kelechi hesitated for a moment, then said boldly, "David, would you sacrifice your reproductive organ for me? I'll pay you any amount you want. Enough to pull your family out of poverty. You have several siblings, your parents won't mind." David's jaw dropped in shock. Anger and disappointment surged through him. "You can't be serious," he shouted. "I warned you not to urinate in that forest, but you wouldn't listen." "I know, and I regret it," Kelechi replied, his tone calm and detached. "But what's done is done. So, will you help me or not? If you won't, I'll find someone else who will." David stared at him, unable to believe what he was hearing. There was no apology in Kelechi's voice, no sign of remorse, just entitlement and arrogance. Shaking his head in disgust, David walked away, leaving Kelechi standing alone, unbothered and resolute. But Kelechi wasn't bothered. "He'll come back and beg for the money," he told himself confidently, walking away without a second thought. The first day passed, and David avoided Kelechi completely. This began to worry Kelechi. He knew his time was running out, and that his life depended on convincing someone to help him. Desperation drove him to seek out Chigazi, the local boy who had taken them to the blind medicine man. Offering Chigazi a substantial amount of money, Kelechi tried to persuade him to sacrifice his organ to the spirits. But Chigazi flatly refused, furious at the suggestion. "You think money can fix everything," he snapped. "But it can't save you from your own arrogance." With that, he walked away, leaving Kelechi to face his fate. Just as the blind medicine man had warned, Kelechi died in his sleep that night. His sudden death shocked everyone, but no one knew the true cause except David and Chigazi, who kept the secret to themselves and moved on with their lives. After university, David secured a well-paying job and used it to lift his family out of poverty. His hard work and determination paid off, and he lived a fulfilling life, always remembering the lessons he had learned. Moral lessons *. 1. Respect others' cultures and traditions *. No matter how wealthy or influential you are, never look down on the customs of others. Kelechi's downfall came from his disregard for warnings about the sacred forest. 2. Humility opens doors *. Arrogance and entitlement will isolate you. If Kelechi had approached David or Chigazi with humility, he might have found a way out. 3. Money can't solve everything *. Wealth provides opportunities, but cannot fix every problem. Kelechi learned this too late.